Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the second part of every single character inside Tokyo Ghoul Break the Chains. We're just here to go ahead and return. We're going to talk about the rest of the characters that they've released. Obviously, since the last video, they have released Juzo as well. If you are interested in trying to see his stats and what he's good at, feel free to check out the video that was released earlier on today. But we're just going to go ahead and go through every single character that I haven't done so far and have a good time with it. Now, I have pulled a couple more characters since the last video, so we're just going to start off with the ones that are up here, so I can get them out of the way, and then we'll go all the way down and talk about the rest of them that we haven't done so far. So, obviously, we did most of the SRs, we did most of the SSRs that I already had. We just haven't done this Touka rabbit, which I pulled today, and we're just gonna start working on through. Hopefully you guys have been enjoying this content. If you do, hit that like button, of course, because it really does help out. But we're just gonna go ahead and read right to it. So she is an AoE debuffer that only gains the vulnerable on the 2-star and above, but I found this Touka rabbit to be one of the most annoying units to fight inside PvP, because she has this vulnerable that increases your damage taken by 10%, and because you have a debuff, they can then use that to stun you with a Takizawa or another Touka, which I have run into at least once with the Touka. Otherwise, it does seem like for AoE breakers, she's just a better version of what Akira Mado was offering previously, but she also gives a debuff that's helping the rest of your team rather than just bleeding them dry. So I kind of like it better. Regardless, her passive skills are as follows. Every 2 debuffs on an enemy character enables your whole team to deal 1.5 times, or 1.5%, not times, percent more damage, and take 1.5% less damage. Max 10 stacks. Now, this is based on the amount of debuffs they have, and vulnerable would only stack once. So you would need to have it where you're having at least this, and the debuff from Yomo, or the debuff from Akira, just some other one to at least get the first stack of that. But even one stack is only 1.5% to both. So it really wants you to have a team that's stacking a shit ton of debuffs, which I don't think exists in the game so far, aside from like the Yomo debuffs that exist. Because he has like a flat 3% debuff for every skill the character uses, I believe. Her second skill is, when a battle begins, increase damage taken by 2 random enemies by 10% over 2 turns. So this would apply by default to 2 characters regardless, even if she's in the back row. So she basically gives a stack of vulnerable to them by default, and that would put them up to 2 debuffs immediately after she uses the vulnerable card. And she has bonus attack, and damage dealt to target is based on 150% of attack, or deal damage to target based on 150% of attack when enemy's debuff expires. Can be triggered up to 4 times in a turn. So that means if any debuff whatsoever wears off, she will follow up to 4 times in an individual turn. And it does say to target, so it isn't going to be an AoE, it's just going to be like a single splash damage on one enemy. But even so, she's kind of doing the same thing that you'd expect a Rima to do, just instead of focusing on like single target DPS, instead she's focusing on stacking debuffs, so she'll follow up afterwards. Interesting. Then she inflicts 2 people with vulnerable for 2 turns if she gets her power burst, which is a better Saboteur. And then when we look at her actual upgrades with her stars, applying weak gives 2 people vulnerable, makes sense. And then ultra vulnerable, damage taken increases by 10% and reduces block chance by 15%. So she could be pretty relevant at 6-star as well, if block chance becomes like a really relevant thing in the future. Regardless, vulnerable is still pretty strong to have on an AoE character, so she probably will be like one of my mainstays on just my grinding teams, for example. We'll see how it goes. For now, I do like her design quite a bit. Obviously, she just is the best. Alright, next on up, we have Ayato. So I noticed Impale is on a lot of characters as their passives, but this Ayato is one of the only ones that ignores defense by default with his AoE card. And so he applies it on every single one of the possible cards he uses. And it feels like he's made to be a grinding unit. Like he's meant to be able to auto pass levels very easily, alongside Touka Rabbit, for example. He's really like that AoE big damage unit. And he'll also always start the first beginning of your turn with surprise attack. The start of your turn deals damage to all enemies based on 100% of attack and applies 1 lethal by default. So he will apply 1 lethal when he comes in to the field, even if it's from the back row into the front row. At the start of your turn, increase crit rate by 15% for 1 turn if you haven't taken any damage in the last turn. So basically, if he doesn't get hit, he does good. So AoEs would counter that. Attack increased by 10% for the first 2 turns of battle, so he has an instant buff. And he also inflicts all enemies with lethal if he gains Power Burst, which isn't something on the rest of his kit, so it could be... This is actually one of the most unique Power Bursts I've seen, except for Juzo's. I like that. Regardless, he is going to be an SSR, so it's going to be kind of hard to get him all upgraded. What does Impale upgrade into? Ignores defense and 30% block chance. Yeah, so he's just going to be like an anti-block chance AoE style unit. It feels like he's made to just be like a generic autoer. But if PvP does rely on like first turn breaking the enemies and like they have more than 1 red, for example, he makes it so you're getting 1 free hit from the surprise attack, and he has an AoE so you can get the weakness damage on all of them with the 1-star card regardless. So he has uses in that way. That's why he's SSR, I feel like. Regardless, pretty cool. And then I pulled 2 more characters. This is Kureo Mado. I actually haven't read up on his kit just yet, so I am kind of curious. It looks like he's an upgraded SR Ammon, because he has a mass, which is increased damage dealt by 20% of your lost HP. So he's kind of trying to get hit by the enemies a little bit. He wants like a lot of max HP to have that 20% be as high as possible. So I guess if you're trying to build him, your RC cells, for example, you'd want to focus on pretty much the HP percent and then trying to get like the rolls on them for HP as well, because a mass synergizes with that. But let's go ahead and read up about his passives. Oh, does he get a mass in the first one? He does. So it is just every card has it. Effective in backup state. Increases damage of your characters to Anteiku characters by 35%. So this is a flat 35% damage to all characters with Anteiku tags. Inami, Toukas, Owls, any Kaneki, I guess, if you're not counting Rude, counting as Aogiri, I guess. That's a weird one. There's a lot of Anteiku characters. This seems like it's actually pretty powerful for like a back row in PvP, but in the same vein, because he wants to take a lot of damage, I feel like he might be more of a front row character. It's kind of weird, but 35% is pretty high as like a multiplier. During a battle in Force Challenge and Teiku, every 3 active skills used by your character enhances their attack by 15% for 3 turns. Every stance skill used by your characters removes their debuffs. Interesting. So Force Challenge and Teiku. Is that this one? No. What is Force Challenge? I don't have it yet. Interesting. So I'm not level 50 just yet, and Mado was created for a game mode that I currently don't have unlocked. Fascinating. We'll talk about how that works and how relevant that is when we unlock that game mode in probably 1 or 2 more days. Interesting. Huh. And then when the battle begins, your characters gain 5% more energy on using skills for 3 turns. It's just like a default thing, but he has to be on the field. I'm seeing that doesn't say even in backup state, so it would have to be him being there. And then gaining Power Burst gains 10% extra energy. Meh. 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 And then this upgrades into Ultra Mass at 6-star, which is damage dealt increases by 30% of your lost HP, so that's an extra 10% damage. Not bad. I feel like he's just gonna, like, really grow by that point. But he doesn't really seem to have a really concrete place inside the game right now, but it sounds like he's meant to be a back row to be able to help out for some sort of either raid or some sort of like I don't know if it's going to be like a wave-based game mode inside Force Challenge. It's very interesting. We'll see how it goes when they release it. But I don't see his uses right now. I'm mostly just seeing him as like a weird pseudo pick for PvP. Not quite sure. And finally, this is the last character I pulled since the last video, so this will be like the final SSR before we go into the rest of the Rs, then we'll get back to the SSRs at the end that I don't have. So this is Ryouko. Reduces damage taken by 45% and applies an Aegis stance. Redirects 50% of damage taken by allies to the Aegis affected character. And there are only one Aegis effect, only the most recent applied one counts. So if you were to have multiple stance characters that have Aegis, it would only apply to the most recent taunt you popped. Makes sense. And then at the end of your turn, deals damage equal to 280% of attack to one random enemy if you've triggered Aegis in the last turn, or if you're the only surviving member on the team. So basically, she has the same sort of comeback mechanic if she's solo that Uta had, where her attacks become damaging at the end of the phase when she gets hit. Makes sense. She's also seems to be like a tank for other characters. She's splitting the damage they take and taking it onto herself and then reducing it by 45%. Or 30%. Or none at all. So yeah. Then her 3-star passive is Heal. Restores HP equal to 200% of defense at the start of your turn if you have taken damage in the enemy's turn. So if they hit you, you get a flat defense 200% to your HP. But I haven't seen defense stats that go all that high. Let's take a look at my Uta. So he has 6,777. If that were the case, she would be doing roughly about 12,000 damage on these hits, which honestly isn't that bad if she were to have the same stats that Uta does right now. I feel like she could be really relevant in that way. And then first, fatal damage taken spares 1 HP and will not kill a character. And that applies to your entire team. That's not just Ryouko won't die. That is, first person that would die has last stand. That's not bad. And then heals you for 10% of HP when you have your power burst. I feel like you could really make use of her in a lot of game modes. It's just a matter of having her alongside other skill characters that can really do good DPS. The skill characters I currently have, including like Kaneki and Hinami, really aren't thriving off of the idea of doing a bunch of damage themselves. They're mostly like sub DPSs. I don't really have like a main DPS for skill. And she's a pure tank, so she'd be really hard to fit in unless I were to try and build a team around it. I still feel like with these sort of skills, she's probably like an A tier, if not like above that, just because it's a different sort of provoke where it's having the damage that someone else takes. So if you were to have Banjo on a team, for example, alongside her, this guy right here, she would split the damage that he takes from the provoke hits and then take half of that onto herself. And so you could do like a double tank team where they really can't get to the characters that you care about the most. So you have like a Kaneki or an Arima in the back row and not have to care too much. I also think that because this is a single target, no, that's the restore. Which one's the damage one? This is the damage one. Because this one is single target and says random enemy, this bonus attack would also proc the follow-up attack from Arima, and so you could probably use him alongside her to some pretty good effect. What is her star up to? Ultra Aegis redirects 100% of the damage taken by allies to the Aegis affected character, so she becomes the pure tank of that afterwards. And that applies to every one of her skills. So every one of these star tiers would have 100% redirect from whoever it hits. That's not bad. That's not bad at all. I really want to see a team with her and Banjo together. I don't know about Shinohara Arata, so I have to try and figure out another green character to bring with me. But here, let's take a look at our list right now. Looks like the last character I did was SSR Skill Ito. So we just gotta do 2 more SRs and then 8 Rs, and then we'll just blitz on through this and get right to it. Though it seems like he actually has some interesting stuff. Okay. Deals damage equal to 9% of your max HP to an enemy, adopting the stance that increases HP-related stats by 10%. That just goes up by a good amount afterwards. So he does DPS based on his own max HP. It's not based on the missing, it's based on his max. And so he has a flat 20% amass that by default will just work. That's just a better version of amass, I feel like. Because the one that Mado was using and Amon uses, 20% of lost HP. If it's going by max, it would scale better than Amon would. And so this Shinohara is instantaneously better than Amon would be without looking at their passives. Interesting. All allied characters and stance gain 20% increased damage. Interesting. So that sounds like it works alongside Tsukiyama Gourmet. HP boost, having taken damage in the last turn. Increase HP-related stats by 2% as your turn starts, up to 5 times. So you can get up to 10% extra max HP. Or not even max HP, like all stats that relate to it. So that would also be restoration, that would be regeneration rate, vampirism, I believe. Not bad. It's just, if he gets hit, he gets this stack up to 5 times. Max HP... What? Increases max HP by 150% of attack as battle starts. That sounds so powerful. Okay, I want to do some calculations on this, because I find this to be kind of interesting. Okay, let's pop up something. So we are going to take the main stat total of Uta right now, which would be ATK 9158, HP 132841. And now we're going to apply that to Shinohara's multipliers and see how it comes out. So without having the attack buff already, if you were to have the amount of HP that Uta does currently with your Shinohara, he would be doing 26,000 damage, and then he would also be increasing his HP-related stats afterwards by 15%, which would make him even tankier. But then, so we're going to keep this number. I'm going to take this 26 and shove it up something. So that does 29k. And that's without any additional multipliers. That's without the extra 15% HP-related stats. That is just him by default. It does seem like he'll hit pretty hard, but when I put up the numbers like that, it's pretty standard for a lot of other characters without other buffs. So, I feel like he's a really good pick. You just really need to build your team around like a strength synergy that is using him to his max potential, which would mean you probably want to have a healer, which we don't currently have any STR healers, strength healers, inside the game right now as far as I know. There's only Hinami as a healer inside the game right now. So we'll see if he's relevant. And then obviously Power Burst is just an extra 10% stats for 1 turn when he does the thing. And then he upgrades his active skills to Ignore Defense at 6-star. That's powerful. Ignoring Defense would completely get rid of their defense stat entirely for all 20% of the damage based on this. You could do some really fun stuff with him. I feel like he's a sleeper hit that actually might be like a really good boss killer if you can build him properly and use him on like a skill-based boss, which Noro currently is inside the current event, so we'll see. Interesting. I like him. Alright, next on up, Akira Mado with the speed version. So this is just damage. 3-star, removes all buffs and stances from a target, dealing damage equal to 420% of attack for 20. But interesting. So she's an anti-buffer and stance changer, where you would pretty much only be using her if you were to be fighting a boss that's using stances and is shielding themselves for more than you're dealing. What else does she have? Moving a buff for an enemy with a skill increases attack by 5% for 2 turns, second to 3 times. So if they have... Stances don't count as buffs. So this would be attack, defense, HP related stats, stuff like that. If they have all 3 of the Uta buffs, she would cleanse all 3 of them and get 15% attack on herself. Not bad. It stacks up to 3 times, but she'll have it permanently from then on. So she does stack up and stay at her stronger level. Damage taken by characters in stance is reduced by 20%, so she wants to be with characters with stance. I guess like Amon, Gourmet. If all allied characters are speed characters, they deal 5% increased damage and take 5% reduced damage. So, not a bad back row for Crusade Battle in that case. If you're investing in her up to 6 limit, which is very heavy, because it's going to cost you a lot, even though she's SR. And then what'd she gain? Active Elevation. She gains Amplification, which is extra damage dealt for every buff you have. And that would apply to every one of her skills. She's like a single target DPS that's made for the pure speed team and is able to get rid of buffs and stances on enemies. She's made for boss fights. Like, without a goddamn doubt. Because of how they've built this game, I don't care about that. Because of how they built this game, the final boss fights, the Abyss level ones, will only let you use speed characters, which will be the case for One-Eyed Owl as well. We're going to do a video on that very soon. It's way too strong for me right now. Way too strong. But similarly, and in the same way, the Abyss version of this will probably be like strength only. And then the Kaneki will probably be skill only. So that'll be pretty difficult. It seems like she'll be one of the ones you want to upgrade if you're struggling with getting your damage high enough for the Abyss version of Yamori's raid. Early on inside the game, she actually might be pretty relevant just because of that. But the investment to get that attack and defense boost, even for just a 5% increase and decrease, I feel like is a lot to invest in her for right now unless you really like her character, or you feel like you'll be fighting a lot of characters that have buffs and stances, which I don't see a lot of right now. Either way, I see a path for her. She just needs to have a little bit extra. I feel like if this passive on limit 6 was on limit 3, I would probably be upgrading her immediately just to get that extra buff and have her in the back row for my main team. But she's built how she's built. It's so weird that you have a female voice. Like, it feels wrong, but that's you. So Jiro, Banjo's sidekick. For 1-star card, does jack shit. Deals damage to a target equal to 260% of the attack, preventing it from casting skills except for debuff applying skills for 1 turn. So yeah, this is the same as the Misato Gori we were looking at before, but instead for the Aogiri synergy, where they would be getting rid of all cards except for debuff applying ones. So, Kaneki wouldn't be able to attack with that. Arima wouldn't be able to attack with that. Rize wouldn't be able to attack with that. It's pretty much only characters like Mado, like Touka Rabbit. Even Ayato would do 0 damage, or wouldn't be able to attack because he does Impale instead of having a debuff. Might be a sleeper hit. I am seeing it's only on 1 character. Was Misato's AoE? Yeah, hers was AoE and also gets rid of control skills. And so I feel like this one gets rid of control skills as well, so they wouldn't be able to actually like stun you for a turn. Interesting. I can see it being viable. It's just, it would need to be some sort of boss fight where you know they're going to be doing attacks and not giving you lethal, not giving you like any of those extra debuffs or anything. Very specific. Really weird for an R. Aogiri Synergy for extra 10% in all PvE combat. Not bad. That works great for the whole team. 10% attack for all speed characters. Doesn't work in back row. Neither of these work in back row. When the battle starts, all enemies crit resist, reduced by 1% for every 1% of your crit rate. Currently 4.5%, not great, but... how would that work? I don't know how that math would translate. Like, is the resist directly taken out of your crit rate by default? Or is the resist a separate stat where it's proccing when you're getting your crit, or when you're doing your hits to see if you will get the crit? And so you're doing your own crit rate, and then it's a check, and then it would check to see if you get it, and if you get it, then it would check their crit resist. Because if that's the case, then this is really good. If it's instead, like, your crit rate takes away their crit resist by default, that would mean that he can't crit himself because he's down by 1.5%. And so he wouldn't be able to get a crit no matter what. I don't know how the math works. I have to find out. But that's kind of interesting. Okay. That's very specific. I want to find out more about that. And this is just extra base stats. Okay, what's your star up? He gains Underbelly, which is extra damage for every debuff the enemies have. This right here is a debuff, so this would count for Underbelly. Not a bad pick. I feel like he is one of those ones you want to get to 6-star. I can see a path where it's usable. It's just you gotta have like an Aogiri tree synergy with him. Are they all made in this way? So obviously the Bin brothers were made as pairs. So this one is prevents attacking skills for 1 turn, prevents attacking skills for 2 turns. Aogiri tree related attack stats in PvP combat, 10%, which is not back row. It's just 10% flat. Wait, no, in PvP there's no back row, because you have all your characters on the field. Oof, so weird. Wait, no, you don't. You do have a back row. Never mind. Forget what I'm saying. I misremembered. Increase all allied strength characters by 10% attack. When combat starts, all enemies' penetration rate increases by 1% for every 1% of your block chance. This one is extra base stats. Yeah, they're all just made as like their own synergy. So he has Underbelly as well. They're made to all synergize together. But this doesn't apply to the other sidekicks of Banjo. This is just like mono team benefits. Need to take a drink. 1 sec. Obviously, don't drink soda to wet your whistle, but I'm starting to lose my voice a little bit. I could see this working. I don't think there's any situation where you get this 10% in PvP combat, because no one's using an R character inside PvP a lot of the time. And they would need to be on the field to proc it, and so it's just not that worth it. Alright, so what's your third one? Obviously this is a skill version of the Banjo sidekick, Sante. So it's Jiro, Ichimi, and Sante. I did not know these names at all. He prevents all but stance skills. If all allied characters are Aogiri tree, their basic stats and restoration rate increase by 5% and 10% when the battle starts. 10% attack rate for all skill characters, only on field. When combat starts, all enemies' restoration rate is reduced by 1% for every 1% of your vampirism. That's fascinating. That would be good for countering out characters that are like stealing your entire health bar, like the blue Kaneki was inside the boss fight the other day. But also, lethal is just a better version of that, I feel like. And then base stats. Let me guess, he gets Underbelly? Yep, Underbelly. So they're kind of made to all go together, and they all have their own versions of the debuff. So they kind of work. This one also pulls them all together, where it has just the straight up Aogiri synergy. All basic stats and all restoration rates and go up by 5 and 10% respectively. I do feel like of the three, this one's the most relevant, Sante. Because of the basic restoration enhancement, this will work for any Aogiri characters in the future, like a half Kujiamori, any version of Noru in the future. If you start using Nico on your teams, for example, the Banjo team. And yeah. Of the three, Sante would be the only one that I think is like a priority to get up. But regardless, you'll be pulling on banners to get copies of them, so probably get them all to 6-star before you ever use them for the first time. I'll try and upgrade them anyway to see how well they do, but it really depends on how high the stats cap out for our characters versus SSR characters. You will be able to tell based on like this flat stats that we currently see and the ones we see on SSRs at level 1 later on when we get down there. How much do we have left? Oh my god, we have... Okay, we're gonna speed run these next 5. Amplification, he gains. Start of your turn, increases damage of next skill by 10% if you have dealt damage last turn. Okay. Reduces damage taken by speed characters by 15%. Not back row, only if he's on the field. Increases damage by 10% over 1 turn for your lower CCG members. So that's synergy with lower CCG, which is only Juzo right now in terms of like meta-relevant characters. And he has the power burst of basic stats. So yeah, he's a pretty basic guy. What does he get from a star up? Ultra amplification, yeah. So he's another blue character that has amplification like Yomo does, but he doesn't have the sort of stuff that makes him relevant like Yomo's passives do. And so I don't even think that he's worth upgrading all that much. Unless you're looking for another really good blue unit that you need to have as your main DPS, I don't think he's all that worth upgrading. But if you do get Ultra Amplification on him, obviously, you can really get him to hit hard, I feel like. You just gotta build him very attack heavy. And if he gets hit by someone, he's gonna get fucking bodied. Look at that defense. So, we'll see. I don't like him. Alright, Gagi. Obviously, we got Gagi and Guge. That'll be the 2. So he's skill. He has preemptive. So he has it on his 1-star card as well. Increases damage dealt by 4% for every 7% of the enemy's target's HP remaining. So he has the same thing that... No, Rize has the opposite. He increases his damage by 4% for every 7% they have, which is like a flat, like pretty much 20% by the end if they're at full HP. But Rize is based on the amount that they're missing, she'll gain crit rate, so it's the opposite. Or kind of like a weird, different version. Okay. He has high attack as well. I also have multiple stars on him. Death of an allied character increases your whole team's damage by 20% for 2 turns. That doesn't say it has a certain amount of stacks, and so you could literally run this guy, and if 3 of your characters die, you would get 60% damage increase, which is pretty strong. All allies take 15% reduced damage when Gagi, Guge, and Naki are deployed. So he's made for a synergy with the team. Okay, is Naki worth it? Increase all Aogiri characters crit damage by 30%, not bad. And extra boost. What is your 6-star? He gets ultra preemptive, which increases the 4% to 6%, and then it's the same thing. Okay, just a higher multiplier. He's a single target DPS character for the skill category that pretty much wants to be on a specific team. And if he isn't, you're basically going to be using him as an amplification style unit and using him as like a main DPS. If you're not using him for that, I don't see a lot of situations where he's going to be relevant on your team, unless you're just trying to get the Aogiri crit rate, or crit damage, but he would need to be on the field to be able to proc that, and so it's not even that worth it. Alright. Guge! Oh my. Me too. He's strength. He has underbelly, so for every debuff they have, he does an extra 20% damage, so it would multiply. Why is he 443%? What are these multipliers? It's super weird. It's not, like, specific. Okay. Death of an enemy causes all remaining enemies to take 20% increased damage for 2 turns. That's strong. When Gagi, Guge, and Naki are all present, all characters' damage is increased by 15%. Increase all allied Aogiri characters' penetration rate by 20%. And the power increase. Let me guess, he gets an upgraded underbelly? Yeah. 25% for every debuff. It's an extra 5% on every one of the debuffs. Naki better be stacking debuffs on the enemies like a shit ton. Because he's expected to be the one pretty much carrying giving debuffs to the enemies for the other 2 to be able to make them usable at all. And it's made so that these 3 have to go together, so Naki better be fucking stellar. We'll see. This right here is the Jobber Man alongside the Glasses Man from earlier. Increases restoration rate, 22%, 22% in just straight up damage. At the start of your turn, increases your attack by 8% over 2 turns if you have not dealt any damage last turn. So if you don't use any cards, you get an extra 8% damage for 2 turns, stacking up to twice because you can't go further than that because of how many it does. Doesn't sound all that great, because you also have to not attack with him. Increases damage dealt by speed characters by 15%, but it's not the back row, so it has to be on the field. Reduces damage taken by 15% for 1 turn for your... over 1 turn for your lower rank CCG members when the battle begins. And he has to be on the field for that to proc. So, not that strong. Once again, all 3 of these guys down here seem like they're pretty poor, honestly. I don't see a situation where you end up using this guy unless you're really going for like a vampirism build with Rize, and you're able to make sure that he's not getting hit most of the time. Also, it has to be him not dealing damage, right? No! It's so much worse. It's any damage last turn. So that includes every single possible card that would do damage to an enemy in general. He will never get this attack boost because you are always going to be attacking on a turn unless you're doing like a crazy buff build, which in that situation, why would you be using a restoration rate character? I guess because you want the extra 1 buff, but that's not even that great. There's also only Yomo as amplification blue. Aside from the other SR we were looking at earlier, what was it? This Akira? That gains amplification here? Yeah. So she also gains it, but yeah, no, he needs someone that has that. I don't like his design. -2. Definitely -2. All right, last one. R Taro, the Scrapper. He just does straight up AoE damage. And he's strength, obviously. Max HP by 10% for all your strength characters. He has to be on the field for that. 15% crit rate when attacking buff targets. Not bad. That would probably only proc once when you're attacking enemies, even if they do have buffs on everybody, because it counts it as buffed targets. And so it's a straight up 15% additional crit rate on top of his 8.5 he already has to the enemy team. Meh, it's not that big of an increase. Most of the time you'll be trying to build around a good crit rate anyway. Guess you can make it so you can build him less crit rate because of that, but start of your turn, deal damage equal to 190% of attack to a random debuffed enemy. So if they have debuffs, do a follow-up attack ×1 on 1 enemy. Okay, sure. And then power increase. Cool. He also gets ignore defense on all of his cards when he hits 6-star. That's a lot better, because I feel like the ignoring of defense would make it so his AoEs hit a lot harder, and if he does get that crit, it'll hit pretty decently. It's just a matter of he has to be on a pure strength team, and so I don't see a lot of situations where you're going to be using him on a strength team for AoEs inside boss fights, so pretty much you're being made to use him alongside like Touka Rabbit and other red characters that would have AoEs. Like, is Mado AoE? Yeah, he is AoE as well. So I feel like Mado, Taro, and Touka Rabbit probably would be like a really efficient farming team, because it's pure AoE, pure DPS, extra max HP, extra crit rate, and it gives you the extra follow-ups as well, while Touka is applying vulnerable to give the debuffs to the enemies every single turn. Other than that, Taro seems like he'll be kind of hard to build around on most generic teams, and that Impale is really what you want to be able to make him usable. Honestly though, pretty cool designs. Oh my god, his voice. They really put a lot of effort into the different kits of these characters. There's a lot of different like styles to it, and I really enjoy it so far. So we're now getting to the SSR characters I currently don't have. We're going to do all but the Juzo down there. So obviously, if you haven't seen the Juzo one, feel free to check that out earlier. We're just going to go through Hachikawa, speed run through all the rest of the ones we've done so far, and see how it goes. So preemptive is the same thing that I want to say it was Gagi that had. Yep, it was Gagi. So Gagi also has preemptive, but this one's an AoE version that would hit everybody. So this extra percent would proc on every single character based on their remaining HP. So if they have higher HP, his AoE will do even more damage. And so he's really made so that you would start out your combos with him, do as much as possible with the damage from him, and then you would focus on finishing off characters with a Rize or an Arima or something like that. He'd be pretty effective, I feel like. His other abilities are his passives. After using a skill, apply charge up to self when you have dealt damage to characters with more than 70% HP, stacking up to 3 times, which he would get 3 stacks by default if he's doing an AoE on the entire enemy team. And the stacks up to 3 times don't go away. So if you hit 3 characters with this, he'll get charged up to 15% instantly. When a character dies in battle, get 20% energy. Great. You don't want people dying, but obviously you want to ult afterwards, I guess. And then increase damage by 30% over 1 turn when the battle begins. So he's made for like that really early on DPS unit. It's really like that first turn. If you could get like a 2-star or 3-star Hachikawa card off, he would have the flat 30% increase on his attack. He would have that charge up just straight up topped off and not have to worry about it again. And he would make it so the enemy team is super, super low if he gets some pretty good hits. He sounds very powerful. Like in terms of strength characters, he sounds like he's going to be a really good AoE unit, kind of similar to how Touka Rabbit is, but potentially even more relevant because he works early on. On a non-debuff team, he actually might be the best way to secure kills early on inside hard levels. I want him. I want him really bad. All right, Naki, how do you work? So you reduce skill levels on your 2-star and 3-stars. In the backup state, it also works. Using an energy card restores 15% of your lost HP to your characters. So AoE heal by 15%, as long as he's on the team and you use any energy card. So that could be 1-star, 2-star, 3-star. Increases your penetration rate by an extra 30% when your character attacks are of restricting attribute against the enemies. Now, restricting attribute, that means type effectiveness, right? Or would restricting be the opposite, where it's the one that you're not effective against? I'm going to say it's the one you're effective against. So extra 30% penetration on characters that are speed, for example, for him. Applicable only in PvP. Increases damage dealt by 15% if your remaining HP percentage is higher than that of the target. And he is single target, so he is just trying to be higher than the enemy's HP, so he can do extra 15%. Okay. And then causes next skill to ignore skill level reduction effects. That sounds pretty poor, because there's not a lot of like downgrading characters right now inside the game. I feel like because he doesn't have underbelly by default, he must be getting underbelly when he hits 6-star. But the Gagi, Guge, and Naki team doesn't sound like they actually synergize all that well. It's just that Naki is powerful enough with his passives, or he can make the other two work in some situations. But the reducing skill level, I really don't see being relevant in a lot of situations, unless you're really struggling with a boss fight that's using constant 3-star cards, and I haven't run into that just yet. I don't know how relevant he'll be. I want to say he's like a C or D, honestly. That's just based on what I'm instantly seeing. Koori Ui has a mass, so it's based on HP lost. Being below 50% HP at the start of your turn, damages a random enemy for 20% of your attack, shielding you for 80% of the damage dealt for 1 turn. So give self a shield worth 80% of double your attack if you get below 50% HP at the start of your turn. He'll do a follow-up. Okay. You deal 20% more damage while below 50% HP. Taking damage grants you a shield equal to 20% of damage taken for 1 turn. And this is Power Burst grants a shield and reduces HP by 15% for 1 turn. Wait, that reduces HP by 15% for 1 turn. I feel like the reducing HP is a bad thing, but because of a mass, they're trying to synergize with Koori Ui always being super low on HP, so they're doing the maximum amount of damage possible. Because, like, yeah, they're also getting the extra shield here. It does feel like they're a really good version of what the Amass should be. But you can't guarantee the enemy is going to hit Koori Ui. And so, a lot of the time, if they have an Arima that's fully buffed, for example, they're going to kill Koori Ui in the first turn. It's not going to matter. Like, they're not going to care what you're doing. So while this sounds really good on paper, I feel like because you can't guarantee them to target Koori Ui at the moment, right now, it's stuck in the same situation as Amon and Mado, where they're just not as relevant, and you don't really want to be low on HP because there's so few healers inside the game right now. I feel like you're going to be really relevant later when we start to get like really crazy, potentially bigger RC cells with higher defense totals. But right now, without having a copy of you, you seem like you're just a non-AoE version of Mado that's mostly specifically targeting being low on HP, which is really hard to maintain inside this game at the moment. I'll keep my eye on you. I feel like you're just not relevant right now, but you have a future. Additionally, Take Hirako got an SSR, which, by the way, this man's a jobber. He's villager number 1, but he got an SSR regardless because he's a hero. He has vampirism, so he has an AoE vampirism. So like Nishiki, he'll steal HP from the enemies, but AoE means he'll steal it from everybody. Dealing damage to HP. Dealing damage to enemies with lower than 50% HP applies Blood Rage to you for 2 turns. Increases the damage dealt by 0.5% for each 1% remaining HP you have. So, if you were at half HP, you would get a 25% damage buff. See, this Blood Rage thing sounds like it'd be relevant for an Amass character more than it would be relevant for a Vampirism one. Because he's gonna be pretty topped off if he hits them, but I guess you'll start out your combo with a lower HP total. Every time Blood Rage is activated, deals damage equal to 180% attack to an enemy with lowest HP. So he has a follow-up attack to lowest HP enemies anytime he's already procced this. So I wonder if this would count you knocking the enemy's HP below 50%. Because if it did, he would automatically follow up with an attack immediately afterwards if you got the Blood Rage stack off of lowering their HP below 50%. I want to find out about that. Let me know if any of you guys have him. Grant defense, Blood Rage. Taking damage has a 10% chance of applying Blood Rage to you for 2 turns. That's great. That's fantastic. Can you give that to Koori Ui with like the minus 15% HP? Because that would be perfect. That's like golden as a synergy. What is your thing? Increases vampirism by 8% for 1 turn. That sounds not that great, but because he already has triple vampirism, it would synergize up to like 24% vampirism by default on power burst, which is good. He seems strong. AoE, skill character, good vampirism, good follow-ups, and he also has the synergy with lower HP. Because of vampirism, he also has the self-sustain, which a lot of characters do not have right now. So you can build him so that he's always going to get low on HP, and then heal it right back up after he uses his card. Kind of cool. I like it. Hirako is always one of those characters I love, though. Alright, next up, Iwao Kuroiwa, the other Arata inside the game right now. So he gains Provoke, which is the same thing that Banjo has, and grants a shield only to himself for 1 turn of 15% of max HP. When being attacked in Provoke state, retaliates upon an enemy, dealing damage equal to 190% of attack, every skill used reduces crit rate by 4%, and crit damage by 8% for all enemies for 2 turns. This is like a hard counter to Rize, actually. That's like really, really strong. And so if you were to pop 2 of his cards, it would have a straight up 8% less crit rate and 16% less crit damage. And I think he would be using at least one of his cards each turn. Not bad. Damage taken from a single skill will not exceed 30% of max HP. He will never take more than 30% of his max HP from any single skill. There's not a lot of... I guess, no, I get Rima would be the one that's a single target that would really hit him hard. He would be able to take at least 3 hits from a Rima, no matter what, assuming that you're not getting follow-up attacked as well. Not bad. And he also grants immunity to loss of control and weak effects from 1 turn on power enhancement. Is that AoE? It says effects, which I think means your entire team. If it's the entire team, this is one of the better power enhancements inside the game right now. If it's only him, it is still pretty powerful because he's directing a lot of the attacks to himself and then not being able to die as he's provoking. So he might just be a better version of Banjo that works alongside Ryouko Fueguchi, for example, we talked about earlier. He also just straight up has like a follow-up attack. I like him. He seems like he's going to be the Clara of this game, if that makes sense. Like everyone has to attack him, and when they do, they get hit in the fucking face super hard. And because the game is so stacked heavily in Speed's favor right now, I do feel like he's pretty good for that category. The skill. I like it. I want him. Now we have both of the twins. First twin is going to deal amplification damage. It's 170% of attack, applies one of the random following effects over 1 turn. Reduces damage dealt, increases damage taken, reduces crit, resist. 1 random effect. 1 random effect. So it's always going to be 1 random debuff of these 3, which is reduce damage dealt, increase damage taken, reduce crit resist. One of those 3, no matter what, are going to happen when you use one of Nashiro's cards. But not all 3. That's kind of unreliable. When dealing damage, 1 buff on you, or every 1 buff on you increases damage dealt by 5%. This cannot be higher than 20%. So on hit, up to 20% based on the amount of buffs you have. So she kind of has that same amplification thing, but she also has a passive that increases the 15% amplification even more by an extra 20% by having those buffs. She just works really well with it. As your turn starts, reduces all enemies' defense by 5%, stacking up to 3 times. So the enemy team by turn 3 will have 15% less defense no matter what. That's great. That's fantastic. She has to be on the field for it, but because she's Speed, I feel like this could really work alongside the other, like, debuff synergy teams. Obviously she works super well with Nashiro, but that 3 stacks of the defense debuff would be 3 stacks of Underbelly, which is 3 instances of extra damage. When dealing damage, increase crit damage by 40%. Holy shit. Then increase basic stats. She sounds ridiculous. That's why she only applies 1 of these random effects and doesn't give herself a buff. She just debuffs the enemies because she's made so everything inside her kit is amplification based and helping Nashiro, or helping Kurona. Then we swap to Kurona. She has Underbelly, which increases your damage by 10% over 2 turns. Sorry, she has a self buff of 10% for 2 turns by default, up to max 3 stacks. So every skill you use of hers, she'll gain a stack of that, up to 3. And Underbelly is increased damage for every debuff the enemies have, which would be a guaranteed 3 on turn 3 if you had Nashiro's. When dealing damage, every 1 debuff on the target increases damage dealt by 5%. This cannot increase higher than 20%. So same thing, but debuff version. So Nashiro would be the one giving you the debuffs on an enemy. And then Does this apply to your team? It just says your damage, so I think it's only Kurona that's affected by it. As your turn starts, increase all allied characters' basic stats by 3%, stacking up to 4 times. So on turn 4, Nashiro will have 4 buffs on her by default, which will be a flat 60% extra damage on amplification. They work super well together. When dealing damage, increase pen rate by 20%, and then, oh, not basic stats. Causes your next skill to ignore 50% of the target's block chance when dealing damage. Block chance right now, still not super relevant. It might be relevant in the future. So this actually might be kind of cracked. The no organization team actually might be really, really good. Because both of these twins are really powerful. Rize is super good by herself. And then the Tsukiyama Gourmet, which we'll get to soon, is another no organization member that has a really, really strong passive that would work alongside these guys especially. I like them. Unfortunately, it seems like if you pull the SSRs, they're really trusting that you have the other version of them, or another character that can proc their passives to make them usable. They're really made to go together. Also, both speed, so they're made to go on the same team too. Cool. Alright, we're currently on Yoshimura Owl. Getting there. So, nothing on the first card, 15% max HP damage. And then 22% max HP damage implies Flaming Blood to all your characters, teammates included. So your entire team. 40% of max HP implies Flaming Blood to all your characters, including... So what does Flaming Blood do? Dealing damage causes additional damage equal to 6% of the attacker's remaining HP. That's pretty powerful. So... he would do 40% max HP damage to one enemy, and then he would also splash them with an extra 6% of whatever HP he has left. And then he applies that Flaming Blood to every character, so they'll have a buff that's giving them 6% of their HP in attack for every single hit they do. That's really strong as well. Max HP boost increases your max HP by 5% and removes all debuffs in 3 turns when you use / level up a skill or take damage. In 3 turns. Technically, this would never proc the second effect until turn 3 then. But every single turn that you're upgrading or you're combining cards, you'd be gaining 5% max HP, up to 30% total. That also applies if you're taking damage. Now, unfortunately, it does only work for Yoshimura Owl himself, so it'll be relying on him being the one to get hit, or the one to use the individual cards. But even so, you can make it so in 3 turns you're going to have no debuffs at all, which the enemy team may not be ready for if they didn't understand where that came from in the first place. That would apply to like very late into PvP, which makes him one of the better like frontliners, for example. Taking damage while in Flaming Blood causes you to retaliate to attacker or 30% of the damage taken. He reflects damage by 30% while he uses the skill, which he gets by default on any 2-star or above card. Jeez. Now, it's only him, it looks like, taking damage while in Flaming Blood. So I think that it would only be them hitting Yoshimura Owl that would trigger this counter. Dropping HP by 35% empties weak bar. So if they were to do 40% damage to you, it would completely refresh your 4 weak that you have by default back to 0. So they wouldn't be able to break you on that turn, so you can use a card next turn anyway. Not bad. And then Power Burst grants Flaming Blood. I feel like he's like a really good sub-support that's also giving like other characters that usually don't do a lot of damage the extra little oomph. Like he can make Hinami relevant, for example, because she doesn't really do a lot of damage, but she heals, and her damage itself is the amount that she heals her characters for. So increasing that by 6%, the damage that she's outputting, would increase the heals you're getting by 6% as well. That's based on her max HP, which would heal for a shit ton, considering that she specializes in HP and is bad at attack, right? Interesting. He really, really works with Hinami. I want him so bad. He seems rad. Yamori has the same sort of stuff that Takizawa had, but it looks like he applies Incapacitated from the first card, and it just upgrades even better from there. So if they're debuffed, he'll apply Incapacitate for 1 turn, which would be extra damage taken by 100%, and if they get hit, it will cancel the effect so they can attack the turn after. It's basically freeze from Grand Cross, and that translated over here. His 2-star and 3-star versions incapacitate for free. Unfortunately, it only does the 1 turn, so you can't, like, really do fancy stuff with it, but not bad. Levels up your skills after dealing damage to immobilized enemies. Whoa, 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 whoa. So any character that's stunned or incapacitated, when you hit them with Yamori on your team, it'll level up all of your skills? No, your skill. After dealing damage to immobilized enemies. So is it going to be Yamori's individual cards will be upgraded on the subsequent turn after hitting someone who had Incapacitate? Because then you could make it so you're hitting them with like 3 Incapacitates in a turn, for example, and getting a bunch of damage off, and they'll still be stunned at the end of the turn anyway. I think that's what they're trying to go for there. At the end of your turn, for each immobilized enemy, your whole team deals 8% more damage and takes 10% less damage for 2 turns. That could be up to 4 enemies, which would be 8% times 4. Yeah, 32% extra damage and 40% less damage to your team for 2 turns is really strong. That's really powerful. And then 20% extra damage to immobilized enemies, and increased attack by 12% for 1 turn for the power burst. Higher than the 10% basic stats that everyone else has been getting, but still not crazy. He's an SSR strength version, red version, of the Takizawa I was saying might be one of the most relevant characters in the game. And so this Yamori genuinely might be like top of the line, like A to S tier, based on how you use him and how much you focus on his DPS. He's really made to get like a bunch of incapacitates off in the same turn and keep them down. Which, the Torturer obviously being good at keeping people down just makes the most sense. Cool. Alright, now we're up to Kaneki. I did mention on another video that Kaneki's specialty was dealing damage to debuffed enemies. I was completely wrong. I do want to point that out. His specialty is, first of all, nothing on the 1-star card. On the 2-star card and above, he'll always apply 2 additional weak to characters that are hit. So this means that even if he's not type effective, he'll be doing 2 weak damage to every single enemy he hits with a 2-star card and above. And this makes it so he's one of the most efficient weakness breakers in the game right now. I haven't read his passives just yet, and so I want to see how he synergizes with that. Stays in Blood Rage state when your HP is above 70%. Meanwhile, triples Vampirism when damage is dealt. Yeah, makes sense. He had the Vampirism, like crazy. Same thing, Blood Rage is the same as the Hirako one, but he's not AoE. Effective in backup state too. Increases all allied speed characters crit damage by 15%. Wow, this Kaneki would be so good alongside Rize. Oh my god. I want him. It's effective in backup state too, which is so crazy. Receives healing, granting 1 frenzy effect. Receiving healing grants 1 frenzy effect. Increases attack-related stats by 4%, stacking up to 5 times. And it doesn't go away. So anytime he's healed by a teammate or himself dealing damage, he'll gain 4% attack buff up to a total of 20%. That's not bad. And that healing applies to any vampirism he has as well. So legit, his 2.5% vampirism by default will be proccing this frenzy effect regardless. Doesn't matter how much you build him into it, he just gets it. And then his power burst is Attack related stats by 4%. Or he just gets a stack of Frenzy for his Power Burst. Yeah, he's made to increase his own attack related stats by a shit ton, and then just break the enemies constantly. He doesn't apply anything regarding debuffs, and so I do apologize about saying that before. I just kind of read him loosely and definitely didn't understand him fully. He might be one of the top characters in the game right now, though when we get more weakness breakers in the game, we'll see how much this like weakness damage thing turns out to be relevant. Because 2 additional weak is good, but even so, having type effectiveness is still a lot better. You'd be doing like 5 damage on, like 5 weakness damage on a 3-star card on a strength type enemy, which is like literally the highest weakness break in the game right now. We'll see as we get more. I want a copy of him, but I'm not going to keep on going for him, so he is limited. We'll see how he's dropped in the future. Now, this is the Tsukiyama Gourmet we've been talking about quite a bit throughout this video. Adopting a stance that provokes enemies for 1 turn and reduces damage by 10% for 1 turn. And he just has the straight up provoke on every one of his cards, which draws all attacks to you. The main thing is that he synergizes with his provoke in some really good ways with his passives, which made him one of the characters I personally want to get the most inside the game right now. Aside from Uta. Uta I think is one of the best ones, but that's just from before. Mass Barrier. Each stance skill cast by an allied character shields your whole team for 200% of the caster's attack for 1 turn. This means that every single character that uses stance, including Ryouko, for example, would give a shield to the entire rest of your team based on their attack stat, and then the enemy team has to break through that, doing 200% of your attack to every one of the characters to be able to break through. That's strong. And because you can use a provoke and Ryouko together, you can make it so you never don't have a stance up. He also has provoke on 1 star, which just makes him even better. Survival boost. Dealing damage to a target removes up to 3 buffs from it and granting himself a shield for 5% of max HP for every buff removed. So he's a buff cleanser as well. Does he do damage with this? He does. Now, it is a single target card, so you can only choose 1 enemy to steal the buffs from, but he can give himself a free 15% HP shield just off of using his card to provoke the enemies, and then he'll also get the 200% shield buff as well. That's really strong, actually. That makes it so that they have to attack him that turn too. Considering we only have 1 other character that gets rid of buffs on the enemies, and that was the 3-star card of the Akira Mado up here, I feel like that makes it so he's really relevant in that way too. Interesting. Alright, attack-related stats boost. When shielded, attack-related stats are increased by 20%. If shielded when enemy turn ends, damages an enemy at random for 220% of attack when your turn begins. If they don't break Tsukiyama's shields on the given turn, he will counterattack and hit them. It'll be random who he hits, so you're not going to be able to choose it to be the green character, for example. But even so, he's gaining the extra 20% attack buff and just doing it for free. And then his power burst is a shield that gets you 10% of max HP for 1 turn. That'd be only on him. Even so, like with a kit like this, I feel like Tsukiyama Gourmet is honestly like S tier. Like the way that he's described, the way that he synergizes with other characters inside the game right now, the way that stances, as well as like Ryouko Fueguchi, for example, and her Aegis work, I feel like it's just the perfect team for doing the hardest content in the game. And so, like, my current team is meant to, like, cheese enemies and do high single target damage. This is, like, the safest, tankiest style of team, I would imagine. I want both. And so we have hit the bottom of this list. Genuinely, I think they put some really creative ideas into some of these kits for these characters. and they've put a lot of thought into combining characters that should work together and making it so they become a more cohesive team. The Gagi Guge Naki team seems like it's going to be a little bit weird because they don't really synergize, they're just kind of synergizing. The Banjo alongside his 3 sidekicks as well is kind of like a weird one. But the fact that they put the thought into these guys being combined in the same team anyway makes me very happy. It's something that only existed in Dark War in the form of bonds, and honestly wasn't all that enjoyable. This feels like you're trying to combine characters that are in the same synergy, in the same group, in the same like friendship, for example, and trying to really build around that in the end game. And the passives that were buffed, like Anteku damage or speed damage or Aogiri tree or whatever. I like it, and it offers a lot of depth that could be really interesting. I am very worried about the fact that they're releasing characters already that are explicitly for certain game modes. Mado being the one that's force challenge and Teku only, which we don't even have an example of because I don't have it unlocked yet. If they make banner characters that are going to be specifically for certain game modes or countering certain bosses, it might make the game super free to, or super pay to win, because if they release a boss, for example, like this Noro, and they were to drop this Noro with a new banner character that's like, in Event Crusade battle, do +2 weakness damage to Aogiri tree members. Well, shit. I guess I need to pull for that character because they're going to be the only way I can break the boss for the subsequent event and be able to grind up for the SSR ticket on the event as well. I feel like that's going to be the ways they really get you inside this game. And Dragon Ball Legends kind of does that right now, where they incentivize you to pull for the new character to get the benefits and extra drops on co-op and stuff like that. So there's definitely ways to be predatory in these systems. And I'm going to keep my eye out. I'm going to be mindful of what the game is all like. And this has been our starter SSR showcase and talking about every single character currently inside Tokyo Ghoul Break the Chains. I'll be covering every single character that drops inside this game from here on out, talking about their kits. So look forward to that. Look forward to update days. And thanks for watching. Take it easy. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.